Everybody's doing well. Always love our Tiger Talk Tuesdays, and this, I think, is going to be a pretty special one. I'm going to introduce our esteemed panel here, and we'll start with Cindy Spiro, who competed for the women's basketball team back in the day and then worked as a graduate assistant, became the coordinator of women's athletics, and then moved into senior administration at Pacific. Glena Carroll, former women's volleyball player at Pacific under Terry Liskevich. First female recipient of an athletic scholarship in UOP history, and she's married to a former Pacific football coach, Pete Carroll. Kendall Dentoni, you might know her as Kendall Kenyon, or you might know her as Sticks, former women's basketball player. Most recently, Kendall, 2000, God, I'm going to date myself. Is it 15?
Yep.
Nailed it. But she finished her Pacific career as one of the best players in Tigers history, holding Pacific's career records in rebounds, offensive rebounds, double-doubles, and blocks. Katelyne Herrington became the head swim and diving coach in 2019 for the men and women, serving as an assistant from 2016 to 18 at Pacific. Went to Fresno Pacific for a year, came back home to coach at UOP. Her dad also played football at Pacific in the 80s. And last but not least, Brian Kolze, who is the head softball coach, the dean of coaches at Pacific in his 29th season, Lodi native, and the winningest coach in Pacific softball history. Welcome to everybody, and it's great to have you with us. And let's get right into it. And we're going to start by kind of giving you some background on how women's sports kind of exploded and grew back in the early 70s. And we'll start, of course, with Title IX. And we were talking before we invited everybody into the group, and we're going to get a little history lesson, I think, here from Glena, because a lot of us, I think, know what Title IX is on the surface and kind of what it represented. And it was passed as part of the federal civil rights law, the Education Amendments of 1972, which led to the growth of women's sports. But Glena, if I can get you in to jump in at first to give us some more in-depth background on what Title IX meant and ultimately what it became.
Happy to do that. Hello, everyone. Well, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 didn't quite go far enough in terms of educational institutions, specifically with gender equality. And so along the way, the Equal Rights Amendment was moving through Congress kind of slowly, and a senator named Birch Bayh and a congresswoman named Patsy Mink, want to give them some credit. They kind of carved out a provision, and it became known as Title IX. And it was specifically to prohibit gender discrimination against persons employed at educational institutions. There was a congressman who thought that there might be a problem, and thought that institutions might have to take care of the women in the athletic department. So he tried to make to enact an exemption where schools did not have to get their athletic departments to comply. Well, that didn't work, but that creates all kind of furor, and that became the focus of Title IX, though there were a lot of other things that came about as a result of Title IX, including all the way forward to the Me Too movement is really as a result of Title IX being enacted. But along the way, Title IX did become known throughout our country because of the gender equity in athletics. And we're all sitting here benefiting as a result of that.
Glena, I'm going to ask you first, and thank you for that. I'm going to ask you first, and then I'm going to go to Cindy, because you guys were in it at the time. But did you have any kind of a heightened awareness as to what Title IX would mean for the future, for where we are now?
Absolutely no clue. It just wasn't, it really wasn't relevant. We were, I don't want to talk for Cindy, but we were students at the time. We barely even knew that Title IX was a thing. It was enacted in 1972. I was in high school at the time, really was not politically active then. So it wasn't until it was brought to my attention in my sophomore year that was the reason why there was now going to be a volleyball program at UOP. And then in my junior year, that's when they talked about, a little bit more funding, maybe some scholarship money, things like that. So no, I could not see the future.
Cindy, how about you?
Well, I graduated from high school the year that Title IX was enacted. And when I got to Pacific, we had tennis and swimming, and that was basically it for women's athletics. And like Glena, I was clueless. I had no idea what was going on. Till my sophomore year, I did an independent study with Cedric Dempsey, who is the athletics director. And he was at the forefront of actually establishing the first Northern California Intercollegiate Athletic Conference for women. And it consisted of Davis and Stanford and Berkeley and Chico State. And I did a lot of little legwork for him in looking into Title IX and to see what the ramifications were. So my junior year was when basketball and volleyball was started for women. I played on the first basketball team, and it was essentially more of a club team structure. We played a lot of junior colleges. We had a graduate assistant as a coach. My senior year was actually the first official intercollegiate athletic season for basketball and women's volleyball. So I got to participate on both of those, but you know, we had one set of uniforms for all the teams. It was this ugly orange polyester scratchy material that looked just terrible, made us look really dumpy. And you know, we get to practice in the South Campus gym at 6 in the morning and no heat, because that was the only place to practice. You know, we were participating. And interestingly enough, I was looking up some numbers, and at that year, that first year of official intercollegiate athletics for women, we had, you know, the sports. We had when Glena was the first scholarships recipient, we had 2 scholarships for women's sports program. The women's sports program budget was a little bit over $12,000 that year. But interestingly enough, the men's sports program was $440,000. So, you know, you can just do the numbers of where we started from. And it's amazing how far, you know, we've progressed.
So 2 things here. How, Cindy, and you can, Glena, you can chime in too if you want to after Cindy, how progressive was Pacific in embracing women's sports when Title IX was passed? And Cindy, well, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I'm speaking a little bit from inside. Glena was a participant, you know. She benefited from Terry Liskevich coming. She got to, that was probably the biggest hire that Pacific did. That kind of was a springboard for success for women's sports program. Like I said, Cedric was a visionary, but when we started, there was no funds for coaches. So the year that I was appointed the coordinator of women's athletics, which was 79, and that was when the Title IX policy interpretation came out. And I wasn't a GA. I was actually a fully salaried person at $12,000 a year. No, actually, excuse me, $10,000.
King's ransom.
Right. Yeah, that was, but where our head coaches were all graduate assistants. We had Cindy Bucky Reynolds, women's softball. We had Gordon Graham, women's tennis. We had Carla Conette as the field hockey coach. And we had Mark French as the women's basketball coach. And his assistant, Julie Hickey. We were all GAs. And we all shared one office. It was the old equipment room in the old main gym. And we called it the pit. And we had one telephone. And all the coaches had to recruit off of that one telephone. So that was a very interesting time.
Glena, did you have anything to add to that in terms of the progressiveness at Pacific in the 70s when this was all happening, and if it was embraced as it should have been in your eyes?
I think Cindy had a much better perspective because she stayed through the 70s. I was there for just a few years, just at the infancy, and as she said, I was a senior when Terry Liskevich was hired, and I'd be curious to find out how much he was paid. He was coming from Ohio State. He'd been the men's head coach. Not that men's volleyball was that big of a deal nationally, but he also, he was a visionary. He saw the writing on the wall. He knew that women's athletics was going to skyrocket, that it was because of the federal mandate. So he positioned himself. He came to California. He I don't know exactly, he picked UOP, maybe he just saw that that was a fertile ground or a private school. He kind of maybe liked that idea. And I mean, he started recruiting like crazy. He had, you know, on a shoestring, not much scholarship money. I think he parceled it out here, there, you know, as a private school. So it's hard for people to pay that tuition. But he really single-handedly, you got to give him credit for the women's volleyball program taking off like it did.
Glena,
Excuse me,
sorry, go
Zach.
ahead, Cindy. Please go ahead.
I'm just going to concur with Glena, because Terry, he was able to really bring his vision to the Stockton community, and he was able to garner donor and corporate support that helped to build the foundation of the volleyball program. You know, he pushed the envelope in the athletics department to gain more resources, to get it in a more professionalized manner. And he was the one that advocated for me to, well, basically to create that position, the full-time coordinator position. Because he kept saying, he goes, I'm going to go to the national championships and I need to have administrative help. And so he, you know, basically.
So he had the vision.
He had the vision, and he pushed Cedric Dempsey to create it and to fund it. And even though it wasn't funded like you'd think it should be, it was a start, you know. And from there, Mary Eberhardt was also hired at the time, Director of Women's Marketing and Fund Development. And, you know, we worked the Stockton community, but it was really Terry's vision, Terry's persistence, you know, that really built a good foundation for the entire women's program, not just women's volleyball.
Glena, you were the first female recipient of an athletic scholarship in Pacific history. How did that come to be? What was that process like for you to be awarded that scholarship?
I don't know the backstory of that. I know that it was Doris Meyer who brought me in her office and told me about it. And I was already on academic scholarship, basically kind of paying for myself the rest of it, not full scholarship. I was piecing together, like most students, piecing together tuition. And so it was a stipend of sorts, and I was thrilled. And then the caveat though was that if I took it, that I was going to have to give up my California State scholarship, which was kind of the equivalent of it. And I thought about it. I said, well, I know the state of California is going to be around for a while. I'm not sure that this athletic program is going to sustain itself. And I didn't want to give up my California scholarship. So I said no, just kind of on principle. And she was taken aback. Like, why would you do that? And I was like, because I have to get myself through school, and I don't know if this athletic scholarship is going to last very long, you know? And she goes, okay, I'll get back to you. And so she got back to me, and she said I could keep my California State scholarship and I could have the athletic scholarship.
That's awesome.
So I didn't have any legal help at the time. That probably could have been a really good case, but
I'm sure. You being the first recipient, did you feel like you were sort of taking this mantle? I know you said you didn't really have any idea what Title IX was going to lead to at the time, but did you feel in any way like you were taking the mantle for women's athletics at the time that you got this scholarship? And even in hindsight, you can say, you know, yes or no.
I did feel that responsibility. I felt that when we started the program the year before with our graduate assistant coach and our uniforms. Maybe those were uniforms. We actually went to the bookstore and got some long sleeve T-shirts because the ones Cindy was talking about were terrible.
I'd love to see these T-shirts. By the way, they sound epically bad.
Yeah, I know, they were just long. They were navy blue long sleeve. It's the only long sleeves they had. We just took what we could get. But we kind of knew that this, like, if we could make a go of it, that this could sustain. And so I think we took that responsibility. And even though, you know, the gym times were bad and the uniforms weren't so hot, but we were getting to play. And that was, I think, you know, talk to any athlete, you just want to play. It doesn't matter if anyone's watching or, you know, what you're wearing. Just, you know, give us a court or a field and we'll go out there and participate. And so that's, we took it from there. And I think I know I was a captain, and I know I was coaching along the way there. Our graduate assistant, I don't know, volleyball, I don't think that was their first sport. So I was teaching girls how to serve and defenses and how to run offenses and stuff. So I was already learning how to coach at the same time.
Oh, that's crazy. I was talking with Glena and Cindy primarily here for the first 15 minutes because I really wanted to lay the foundation of how this all came to be. And I want to start to weave in Kendall and Katelyne and Kolze. And Kendall, I'll start with you. When you look back at what happened during that time, and I know you obviously didn't live through it, but looking back and studying it, observing it from afar, what have you, how much can you appreciate some of the things that Cindy and Glena are talking about in terms of getting women's sports to the point where you could have the type of run as an athlete, a student athlete that you had at Pacific?
100%. Yeah, it's phenomenal how far, women's sports have come. I've even learned a lot that they've already been talking about Title IX and everything that it used to be and what it now is. I mean, Cindy was talking about how they used to practice in South Gym. I remember like my freshman and sophomore years, we would have our worst conditioning days. We'd be going in South Gym. It's hot in there, it's slippery, we'd have open gyms. So to have everything that we had is phenomenal. I mean, we had meals all the time. It was like Christmas year round with gear and things like that. We had Jansen Ligorio, a brand new, practice facility. So we were really taken care of. So it's crazy to see how far everything's come. Really, really blessed to have been able to, play during that time.
Katelyne, how about you when looking back on what happened in those days in the 70s?
No, absolutely. Kind of just piggybacking off of Kendall, getting to kind of just provide those different experiences now for the women's team. Like she said, just the different facilities, the upgrades that we've had. We recently just totally had an upgrade at our pool with the electronic scoreboard and our new seating, which is just amazing to have that championship environment for our team to practice in, on top of all of the fun gear, swag from the toe, head to foot. And so it's kind of like, I can't really relate to the time as an athlete and as a coach to kind of what they were talking about, because it is such more of an awareness and an experience that the women are getting to have now.
Kolze, I know before we invited everybody into the room, we established the fact that had it not been for softball, you'd probably be working on Cindy's ranch as a ranch hand somewhere. I mean, with the explosion of women's sports, I mean, you've been able to not only build a life and a career, but also be able to watch these young ladies grow and develop and do special things. Looking back, how do you view what happened in the 70s? And as a guy that did live through that time, maybe didn't benefit so much being a male, but you lived through it and you saw what was happening. Can you give us some insight and perspective through your eyes?
I think the biggest thing is you realize the inequality in its infancy, in kind of what Cindy and Glena were talking about, and being, and ironically at Division I where they were at, I played Division II baseball and I played at Northridge, and we had one set of uniforms. We had to van 14 hours to go play in Arizona overnight through the desert, like 8 guys in a van and your coach is driving. And ironically, the parallel at Division II was much closer than the parallel at Division I at the time. But I have so much respect for that, because having coached, for instance, I was at UNLV when I first started coaching from 88 to 91. And that was the heyday for Jerry Tarkanian in basketball. And I'm not exaggerating when I said money grew on trees in Las Vegas at that time, that you weren't told no for anything. We were making $2 million a weekend for a basketball game, didn't have to share it, those types of things. But I think you have a greater appreciation for coming here, building a facility, building a program. The infancy of our program is when Bucky was here, being from Lodi, they had to play at the complex in Lodi. Then they had to move and play at Lewis Park in Stockton. Then they had to move and play at Oak Park in Stockton. And then I was blessed that Bob Lee, Cindy, and the administration got a donation from Bill Simone, a local person, to then start the on-campus facility, which when I was hired in August 92, I was actually running to the architect's office every week with Larry Bishop who was a former athlete here and ironically a former teacher of mine in high school, whose daughter was on the team, and just trying to do the best we can with the funds we have. And that really started for our program is when we were able to move on campus. And then you could start to do things your way. And that was the biggest thing for us in the infancy in that time frame.
You bring up a great point with the facilities, and Pacific is blessed to have so many top-notch first-class facilities. But how important are the facilities in securing the growth of women's sports, you know, moving forward into the future, Kolze?
Well, I think the big thing is whether we like it or not, it's you know, it's a swag society right now in regards to the kids that you recruit. But I think one great thing about Pacific has always been be true to yourself and be who you are and sell what you have to sell. There's a high retention rate at our university because I've been here and seen many coaches with many sports, but don't roll out the red carpet for a kid and the red carpet isn't here when they show up. And I think that's a big part of it. And you get kids that want to make a difference. A lot of athletes come to Pacific, turn down big schools because they want to have an impact. They want to make a difference. They want to be a name. They don't want to be a number. And also I've been blessed, ironically, including Cindy as an interim, I've had Janet is the 8th athletic director I've had. But they're all have had the same similar philosophy. And it's been great here, as with the leadership of the university, that I just got off a meeting with some other coaches that don't have the luxury of, like, if you go out and raise money, it is yours. It's yours to do with it. If you have a project, I'll tell you, I can help this much if you get this much. And if you're aggressive and you're a worker, you're going to be able to create a level of success and improvement in your program, because you're not going around and putting it all in a pot of money for everybody to share. And that's a stone cold truth. And that's what has helped the facilities grow. I'm fortunate I was a local guy. Ed Sprague was a local guy when he built the baseball facility. You know, Eva Zimmerman was an alum. I don't know her, but you do cartwheels when you look at that. Kelson was here, local guy. You know, those are the kind of things, Spanos, all those people. And that's important, that those relationships over time have helped foster the growth of the facilities, just like the Ligorios most recently. Sure.
I want to go back to Glena and to Cindy for some perspective on this, and in particular, Glena, because you played volleyball, but as everything evolved with women's sports, and Heather Cox was on here, I think it was maybe 2 months ago, and she was talking about how when she was growing up, it was such a concentrated volleyball culture on the West Coast, and it was the West Coast schools that were really the power. And then as the money grew, you know, that money started to push things out toward the bigger schools, the Big Ten schools out in the Midwest, the Nebraskas, the Penn States. Can you give us some insight as to what it was, what the landscape was like back when you were playing volleyball, how regional it was, and then subsequently how it grew and got built out to the Midwest, where that's where the big powers are now?
I think I have a unique perspective on this because we lived so many different places in the United States. But starting off in California, I was from Southern California, and volleyball was, you know, that was the place where it was really the hotbed. So there were always people playing, boys and girls. It was just, it just seemed like that was just the way of the world. And then even coming to Northern California, it was like volleyball, like not many people played. And I remember coming to school, and I went downtown to the YMCA to try to find people who played volleyball. Seemed like old men to me now, but there were a few of us from my high school, and we would go down there at night and play. And then we started, we got must have been Cedric Dempsey again to pave over a parking, or to cover a parking lot next to the old gym and build a sand volleyball court. So we were kind of the Southern California kids that were just, pushing the limits of trying to get volleyball just in Northern California. Sure. And then as we started moving, my husband and I started moving, we hit like 6 or 7 states in the next 10 years or something. And just was just really hard to find anyone who played volleyball, and volleyball really wasn't much in high schools, and it was just kind of just starting in colleges. I remember I played on the club team at Iowa State. We were there. These were the college athletes, and I jumped on the club team at Ohio State. They were happy to have a California person. I was at University of Arkansas. It was the first year we left UOP, the program had just been defunded, of all things, since 1977, and they must have decided volleyball was not that big of a deal. So the team came to me. They found that there was some girl from California who played volleyball, and they asked me to coach their club team. So here I am, I'm like a year or two older than them, and I'm driving the van and schlepping through Oklahoma and Missouri, schools I'd never even heard of. But I could tell, it was just like, I could tell as a Californian, I was like seeding, the country here and there, and, influencing as I could. And again, I give credit to Terry Liskevich for being such a great coach. I also had a high school club coach named Pat Zartman, who ended up being also a national team coach. So I was a beneficiary of 2 national team coaches as I was growing up. And then moving across country, whether it was coaching my kids' high school teams or their club teams, influencing young girls to play volleyball instead of soccer. Just kind of kept the ripple going across the country. Thank you for the question.
Oh, for sure. Cindy, I know you didn't play volleyball, you played basketball, but maybe as an administrator, your take on seeing those resources kind of matriculate from the West Coast outward as everything grew in women's sports.
Right. Well, it's important to remember when we were in school, our first years as intercollegiate programs, we were under the Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, which was a counterpart for the NCAA. And it wasn't until 1981-82 that the NCAA voted to sponsor women's athletics. So the competition was very regional at that point, in those early years. So you had UCLA, USC, and Stanford and Pacific were like the top 4 in volleyball, toward, late 70s, early 80s. And that was really, people came to Pacific. It was one of the hotbeds. In the 80s, things changed. The NCAA voted to sponsor women's sports. The AIAW disbanded. And then there was also a milestone legal decree in 1983 where Notre Dame got to hold their TV rights, which meant that universities were able to secure their TV rights, and there was a bucket of money there all of a sudden for a lot of the big schools in the Midwest. Well, then, in order to comply with Title IX, remember we have compliance was a part of it. And through the 80s, Title IX was almost kind of furloughed. In fact, there was a couple of court decrees that de-emphasized Title IX. And then there was a major court decision that said, hey, you cannot put, you can't eliminate the calculation with football and basketball in the men's side for Title IX. Well, then there is a lot of money plowing into women's sports, and it just grew exponentially. You had a lot of men's volleyball players like Terry who became coaches, that they saw fertile ground for coaching in the women's side. And then they would start their club teams. They would, build the foundation just like Terry did in Stockton and in the Northern California area. So it progressed. I mean, even in softball, and Brian knows this well, we've talked about this a lot. The West Coast was known for its softball. The Big West annually brought in multiple teams into the NCAA championships, and then all of a sudden you had, like Brian says, the Swag Society. You had all this money flowing at Florida and Texas and Oklahoma. They just plowed money into their women's programs, built these state-of-the-art facilities, recruited nationally, and it's changed the landscape of women's sports in America.
Zack,
yeah, I was going to go ahead, follow up.
Well, to let you know, part of what Cindy said, I did a little thing before this. When I started, currently today, as of the 2020 season, there are 298 Division I softball programs in the country. When I started 29 years ago, there was approximately 110 less programs. So there's been about 110 programs for softball, which when Glena and Cindy were involved in volleyball, same thing, only a few years ahead. But of those that have been added, to be honest, the landscape has changed. 90% of them that added softball have a football program. And I was looking at another figure with that is that that was before there was the Atlantic Coast Conference, the Southeastern Conference, Conference USA. All those conferences were formed out of all that growth. And I mean, and the landscape has changed in regards to that.
That's amazing. By the way, if you have a question, you can feel free to ask it. You go to the chat and you ask it through Bree, and then Bree will pass it along to me. We do that just so the chat doesn't get hacked, because that's always ugly when it happens. So if you do have a question, feel free, and we'll leave the last 10 minutes to get your questions answered. I want to kind of focus on the future now and where there is to grow, what areas there are that can be grown and how you can get better as it pertains to women's athletics. And I'm going to start with Kendall and Katelyne on this one. Kendall, you played obviously most recently in 2015. Were there any elements that came to your mind while you were a student athlete at Pacific where you thought, you know, we can grow even more with women's sports? You get what I'm saying? Like, were there things in your mind that popped out saying, man, like, we need this for the women's side? Can you give any insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, in general, women's basketball has obviously gotten a lot more predominant over the years. But in terms of all the rest of, collegiate athletics and women's athletics too, I think it's a thing that, like, my teammates and we would always try and go support all the other women's teams and obviously the men's sports as well. But I think that's just being one thing, obviously continuing to support all the other, collegiate women's sports throughout the university.
Katelyne, can you give us some background on when you competed, where you competed, and what that was like and the years?
Yep, absolutely. So I competed collegiately at UNLV, Nevada, Las Vegas for 4 years. And then after my time competing there, I was my first year coaching as a VA. And then after that, my first full-time position was at University of New Mexico, where I was the assistant coach for their women's program. And then from there, took me to back to Pacific, which is home for me, born and raised here. So I've been an assistant for about 2.5 years. And then, like Zack said, I took over the program at Fresno Pacific, men's and women's D2 school for 1 season, and then had the opportunity to come back. So I just wrapped up my first year as head coach at UOP. It's interesting now because just talking about like women's sports in general, and I now am overseeing both the men and the women's programs. And when it comes to recruiting and all those types of things, our women in swimming is so competitive. It's so hard to get women just because it is so competitive versus the men's side. And so it's interesting. I think areas for us to grow and where I see that could help us and our programs, obviously, scholarship is always that helps kind of get that competitive edge amongst our other peers. And so that's kind of where I see, myself as a little bit of a competitive, challenge at the moment, and just where we need to be able to grow. It's interesting. But it's wonderful to see as well, to see the competitiveness that swimming has taken through the years.
Cindy and Glena, having been at the genesis of this whole thing back in the 70s, are you pleased with the way it's grown, and where can it be better? And Cindy, I'll start with you.
Oh, I think it's fabulous. I mean, it was a thrill to watch Kendall, play basketball, to see Pacific host the NCAA Women's Basketball Championships, at Arco Arena. Just to see the growth. It's great to see, a woman heading both men's and women's programs at Pacific. I think that's awesome. And I think that there's still a lot of potential for growth at Pacific because of the fact that you have that good, strong basis of community support, which, like Brian was illustrating, has really been the backbone for the women's athletics program growth. Without the community support, without the people coming to the games, donating to the programs, and now we have second generation Tigers come into the program. It's been very exciting. I think that there's some great potential in the future. I'll be honest with you, we're in a new era with this pandemic, with the elimination of external resources for higher education, for the downsizing of athletics programs at the major universities. So it's going to be very interesting to see what transpires over time. But I'll be honest with you, I think I'm very proud of being a part of the Tigers women's program, and to see the women today and their competitiveness. They compete with pride. The academics are foremost. I think the program's in a great position.
Awesome. Glena, how about you?
My perspective is maybe more baseline, and going back to just women competing and women translating that opportunity into just overall confidence, and for the most part does not translate to anything professional. It has enabled women to become better participants in society. And so I see that kind of more from a global standpoint. So I certainly don't want anyone to be diminished. Like, I know there's a lot of men's programs that were cut as a result of Title IX. I've got lots of friends who talk to me about their experience or their son's experience. And now I know at Stanford, they had to cut quite a few programs, like you were saying, Cindy, and men's and women's programs. So I think there has to be a reevaluation. Maybe everyone doesn't need to be as huge and as costly. Maybe it's better if we all downsize a little bit and not go to all these preseason tournaments in the Bahamas or Hawaii. I'm all for greater participation than just the few teams at the top getting all the notoriety.
So that's how you feel we can get better with this.
Without a doubt, I would rather have more people play than not. And if that's like Cindy said, maybe the pandemic has made us reevaluate. Just maybe this growth has just gotten too big. And I don't want anyone to be diminished. If we're going to downsize, everyone should downsize. And it should start at the top of the revenue sports. I know they're the cash cow. I understand that. Better than probably everybody. But I do like the idea of better, more equity always across the board.
Yeah, I agree.
Cindy, what was it like breaking into administration as a woman? And was that, how many women administrators in athletics, like thereabouts, were there? Like, what percentage would you assign to the number of women in administration and athletics in the 70s and 80s?
Well, remember, we were AIAW. So all of the athletics programs for women were run by women. When the transition occurred in the NCAA, all of a sudden they were swallowed up under the men's umbrella. So, but as far as me personally, when I started, it was very interesting because, Title IX was very contentious at the time. In fact, the NCAA had a lobbying effort with Congress to exempt football and basketball. And they tried to, because they did not want to have that as part of the calculations. And that was shot down. There was a lot of women lawyers that shot that down. But when Mary Eberhardt and I, first led the program, we would go out to, individuals, men boosters who had supported men's basketball and football. And we said, hey, we're trying to start this program, and would you be interested in coming to the volleyball game? They said, we don't want to go to no DG ball, They saw women's sports as a threat. And so we had that obstacle to encounter. And all we did was we smiled, we gave them 2 tickets, we said, come see a game. And once they saw the game, they saw the athleticism, they saw the passion, they saw the competitiveness, they loved it. And they kind of turned around. But at first we encountered, some sexist opinions and attitudes. We had, harassment. We had a lot of those commonalities, that women that women encounter when they're going through a whole new avenue, whole journey where you're the first woman, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But you just smile, you keep to your principles, you keep to your mission, and you just smile and, hey, we're going to make it happen.
Kendall and Katelyne, I don't need specific instances, but have you encountered any of that type of sexism still in this day that Cindy just talked about? And Kendall, I can start with you.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's still out there. Probably was worse back then, but whether it be little, comments here and there, whether I'm a female and, can't play the same athletic abilities or just, anything here and there, but definitely have experienced some of that.
Yeah.
Katelyne?
Similarly, same, being a female, thinking the idea that I look something, so I'm going to act one way. And so definitely get those side comments. I know that, being a female role model, just like Cindy said, just sticking to my morals, my values, my focus, my intention, the culture. And that's kind of where I kind of have to kind of find that tunnel vision in times where there might be a comment that slips or it's overheard in that position.
Well, you gals are also strong and inspiring because you handle it with such grace and you persevere and find a way to I don't know if making it better is the right way to put it, but I mean, you persevere and you turn it into something positive. So on behalf of, I think, everybody, thank you for doing that. I have some questions that I want to drop in. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Doris Meyer, who is a women's sports pioneer at Pacific. She is on this call. So hello to Doris.
Hi, Doris.
Hi, Doris.
I want to talk with Cindy and Glena for this question. We see, this is from the gallery, we see those large NCAA volleyball national champions banners from the mid-'80s at the Spano Center. Cindy and Glena, can you reflect on what those two titles and the program's Olympians meant to Tiger women's athletics as a whole? Glena, I'll start with you because you did play volleyball and you were part of that first group and the first scholarship at Pacific. So what does it mean to you to have your alma mater have those two national championships in the 80s?
Oh, I was so much pride that this fledgling program at a small university could reach that height. It was almost incomprehensible. It really was. And I grew up in Southern California, as I said, so I was aware of USC and UCLA. I'm not sure where they got their funding early, but they were fielding teams, and they were fielding teams with future Olympians on them when I was in high school. So I was aware of them. That seemed like, that just seemed like the mountaintop. And so for UOP to even be mentioned in that same conversation was overwhelming. I was so proud of Terry, and then the other coaches that came along after that, and the other players. It was really. I was just really proud to be part of that.
Cindy?
Oh, same way. I mean, it was the culmination of so many years of hard work, so many people's passion put into it. And all I could think of, the people like Doris Meyer and the people like Libby Matson and Tess Aberley and some of these individuals, when Mary and I first tried to get community support for the program, here's all these women that played field hockey in 1948 in the 50s, and they didn't have an avenue to participate, and they just embraced the women's program, especially women's volleyball. And to see that culmination of so many people's passion and interest and heartfelt hard work put into it, it was exciting. And I was in the stands for the second one when we hosted at Spano Center. And it was thrilling to see how far Pacific had come, and just a lot of great pride in my school.
Awesome. Great answers. Thank you. Kolze, I didn't mean to leave you out of a topic we were talking about before. It was not intentional, I promise. But
it's okay. They would know more about that than I would.
Well, I was going to ask you from before, how do we continue to grow, let's say softball? I mean, that's your venue. How does it continue to grow and progress in a healthy way moving forward?
Well, I think, like the other sports, I look at how it's already grown. I mean, when I first got here, we wore shorts. Now we wear pants. Softball now has the same bat and glove sponsorships that college baseball programs have. It became an Olympic sport. Television ratings for the sport are through the roof. One thing that hurts, I think, maybe a little bit beyond college, and it's a blessing for women's basketball because it's tremendous that the NBA is behind the WNBA to help create that platform after you're done with college, plus overseas as well. We don't have that in softball. And unless someone like Major League Baseball were to partner potentially down the road and do that, it would elevate it even more for that post-college type experience, because we've had some pro leagues, but it's not near the same as some of the other sports. But what's going on with it in the college game right now, which truthfully is probably the pinnacle, because of course you have the Olympics, but now there's where sometimes it's in, sometimes it's out, depends on what country, and all those things have changed because it's really polarized to be basically as professional almost as anything else. The college game has done a really good job in marketing itself and creating opportunity, expanding roster sizes, getting tremendous manufacturer sponsorships and so forth. That is what's probably helped us the most, along with the great television ratings whenever it's on television.
Kolze, you mentioned the WNBA. I want to jump up to Kendall. Are you pleased with what you see from the WNBA right now in terms of its reach and its platform and how it's grown from its infancy to now?
Yeah, definitely. It's awesome. Like Kolze said, it's really cool how the NBA can kind of pick that up. And like I was fortunate enough to go play overseas and kind of have that platform to continue playing my career. So it's cool that, there's I think 12 teams at WNBA. They're getting a ton of, national media coverage right now, especially with the pandemic, the bubble, and all of that. Pretty much all the games are televised. So it's really cool to see.
What's women's basketball like overseas? I didn't even think about getting into that with you, but now that you brought it up, is it similar to what we see in the U.S. or is it different in any way?
It's different. I mean, I was in Germany for about a year. So it's actually pretty big over there. Certain teams are a lot bigger than others, but they get pretty into it. So it was a pretty cool atmosphere over there. It was fun. But basketball is pretty much the same game wherever, which is really cool. It's a lot more physical over there. So it was fun to get after it.
I have more questions here from the gallery, and I'll start with Kendall, and I'm going to jump over to Katelyne too. If you could change one thing about athletics today, I'm guessing they mean athletics today as pertains to women's sports, what would it be? It could be fundamental, whatever. I'll start with Kendall.
I think honestly just more opportunity. Like Kolze was saying, I was lucky enough to play overseas, but there's really not, as far as I know, I know you can play volleyball overseas and other things like that, but there isn't a ton of that opportunity. And even with the WNBA, like I said, there's only like 12 teams, so it's pretty tough to make that. So even if there was, like a G League for, women's sports across, the country, I think that would be awesome for just more opportunities to continue that.
Katelyne, how about you? If you could change one thing with women's athletics.
Women's athletics, being an Olympic sport, we do have a lot of opportunity for growth and different little circuits that you can be involved in afterwards. And they do a pretty good job of providing those opportunities for the women to continue, their sport and their, experiences after college. I'm not sure if I can really pinpoint one thing that can really, make a difference. I mean, I think that, swimming has done a really great job of providing opportunities up to this point. So, yeah.
Glena, I had a little birdie yesterday tell me that you maybe knew more than your GA when you got into coaching. Is that right? Did I say that right, Cindy? You were telling me this yesterday about Glena, that she I guess knew more than the GA that was coaching, right?
Well, that wasn't her fault. She was wearing two hats. She was hired to coach the basketball and the volleyball team, and they probably had one GA position, and they found the best they could. They found someone who had some experience with both sports. I think basketball was more her sport than volleyball, and that wasn't her fault. She'd grown up probably with not very many opportunities to play, and And as I said, I had been playing since grade school, and playing at the beach and playing on club teams and high school teams and playing really competitively. So I just was in the right place at the right time. I'm sure I probably overstepped my bounds a few times. Probably didn't like it sometimes if I stepped in. I mean, I tried not to, like, I wasn't like, like gathering the team like over her, but I was just like doing little skill sessions on the side, just because some girls, I mean, I can't even remember, Cindy, like how many people even came for tryouts, and there were a smattering of girls who maybe played a little bit in high school, and so we really were, just at ground zero in terms of.
Yeah.
So
I was just going to say, when she said that at the tryouts, I think myself and another student were the only ones that had ever played organized basketball on the entire basketball team. That's how we started.
Well, the reason I brought up the coaching thing is because one of our questions was, do you think there is more room for women to be involved in coaching? And this could be for both women's sports and for men's sports. And Glena, I'll start with you on that. That's the reason I kind of wanted to bring that anecdote up, is because you in a sense were part coaching at the time you were playing, but I think for me, there's still a ton of room for there to be more women involved on coaching staffs in both men's and women's sports. It's something we're seeing now, and I think something we should see more of in the future, but I'd love to get your perspective on it to start, Glena.
Oh, without a doubt. And when I look back, I should have been a coach. I didn't entertain that notion. I didn't have role models for that, and that wasn't even a job that you could aspire to have. But along the way, I found myself coaching, that, like you said, like on club or high school teams or my own kids' teams and things like that. And had things been different, I think I probably I would have been a coach. I was in the right place at the right time. I had skill level. I'd been mentored correctly, and so when I get to that point, I think we need to mentor more women, young girls, that is a career path. I mean, that is available, and connect them with people that can teach them and mentor them, bring them along.
Cindy, do you feel there's room for that, for women to grow into coaching?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like Glena said, there's a whole structure that's out there, for women to be mentored and to grow. There's established networks across the country for that. And I think that it's very, very important to not only encourage women to get into coaching, but also provide the environment to allow them to coach. Because women have children, and then you have childcare situations. In order for women to be successful at the coaching level, an institution must, understand that things like, maybe taking your baby on the bus, because you're nursing or whatever. I mean, there's the whole family, aspect of that to support women to be successful in coaching. We've had a lot of women who have gone into coaching that have been able to do things like that. And I think about Janie McHugh. I think about, Becky Leyland. I think about different women that had children, that were encouraged to continue coaching, but they had that support from their administration to do this. So.
Kendall, Becky Hammond comes to mind when thinking about women coaching, obviously in a men's venue, so to speak. Do you feel like you could coach men's basketball?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we were just talking about that, Becky Hammond came to my mind as well. The SF Giants now, Alyssa, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but there's a lot of women breaking into major league sports, and it's awesome. I didn't choose to go the coaching route, but I think had I would have stuck with that, I think they're just paving the way for women athletes everywhere if they want to get into coaching, and it's really cool to see.
Kolze, I've been watching a lot of Giants games, and I see her coaching first base, Nacken with the Giants. I mean, I'm sure there are many elements of softball that translate just fine when crossing over into baseball. Can you give a little perspective on that?
Well, there are some things regarding fundamental and philosophy, but you know, there are also some things that change a little bit because unlike basketball or soccer, there's an extreme difference in the dimensions of the facility that you play on. So those are some things that you have to learn a little bit along with some of the playing rules. But there are a lot, you know, Heather Tarr, my former assistant, who's the head coach at University of Washington, you know, she didn't have fast pitch. She played Little League growing up. So she learned on a baseball field and transferred it to a softball field. There's actually a lot more baseball coming in that is then going to create those opportunities for the softball players going out. You know what I mean? Like more baseball has come in to bits and pieces of our game and backgrounds of coaches, but that is going to help go out. My current assistant, you know, her father was a former big leaguer and has been in the Giants organization for 20 years. So there's things that she's brought that she could bring to a baseball field. Same with my other assistant, Tori, who was a tremendous catcher in her days and learning things and could teach. I think there's a lot of parallels that can happen in that, excluding the pitching part because of that whole biomechanical situation. But there are some other things and some fundamental skills that without a doubt that once you learn could easily transfer from A to B.
Katelyne, I mean, we have it at Pacific, right? We have James coaching men's and women's water polo. I'd imagine this concept would be just fine in the pool with women coaching men and vice versa.
No, absolutely. It really is. You know, ironically, just talking about women coaching, I didn't actually know I wanted to be a coach. It wasn't even a thing that was really on my mind because I think the norm, you know, I had male coaches my whole life. I just didn't really feel like that was my place. That was my role. But I remember after I graduated, my college coach hired me and it's like, you just try it out. And I remember going out on deck and, you know, he looked at me and he was like, you were made to coach. Like you just light up, you know, like that's where you're supposed to be. And it was like crazy. It was like that moment I remember, you know, it was like, this is my direction, and started my master's, started kind of developing a little bit more of the skill sets to be able to help me with coaching and just training the athletes. But I think the one neat piece of that was the fact that I got to mentor women and they got to see me as a leader. They got to see me as a mentor. And it's been really neat to just see, you know, that transition and that mentorship with my athletes, getting to see a strong female leader on deck. And even for the males too. I mean, both when I'm on deck as well. And I think there's been a neat dynamic that creates, having both, you know, men's and women's, you know, team in the water training at the same time, having that leadership role, having that mentorship. So it's been a neat ride to kind of just see where that has kind of progressed and flowed for me through my years of coaching both programs.
That's a great story. And it's awesome that someone sparked that in your mind about getting into coaching. If only Glena had that, you know, a couple decades ago, it would have been a different path.
Well, I'll add to that.
Yeah.
Terry did ask me to be a graduate assistant upon graduation. But my husband was also a coach, and we moved to the University of Arkansas. He was getting it was still a GA position, but it was an opportunity. And so we followed the more traditional path of chasing his career. But I have no regrets. I've gotten a lot of opportunities along the way, and I love Katelyne's story about coaching men and women. I've gotten to coach young boys and young girls. I think it's important for both genders to see women be leaders, be confident, be smart, be strong. And that there's differences in coaching men and women, but it's important for all of society to see everybody participate equally.
Amen. We're kind of rounding the home stretch and we got to go soon. But before I go, there's another comment here from the gallery. They would like from each of you your favorite Pacific athletic memory. And I'll go easy. I'll start with the most recent, so that the people here that played in the 70s can maybe go back in the memory bank. But Kendall, I'm going to start with you.
I mean, that's not even an easy one. I don't know.
Whatever. You had so many moments. I saw so many of them. So don't be modest and just pick one.
I mean, we obviously went on the trip, but we went on like a week and a half trip to France. And for us to be able to do that as a team, coaches, bonding, and also get to kind of experience that life overseas and play against, grown women was really cool.
Real quick, while I have you, playing for Lynn Roberts, who I thought was a great coach, and I mean, she really directed that women's program in the direction where it is wound up now under Bradley, who I see is here. But what was it like to play under Lynn, and what was her style as a female head coach?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a little bit different because coming from St. Mary's, I played for Tom Gonzalez, so I had, was used to playing for a male head coach. But honestly, her style was, intense, and it was kind of the same. So for me, it wasn't a huge carryover from high school to college. So I think I lucked out in that aspect. But she also brought a ton of, fun to the game, and was really lighthearted as well. So it was good competitive atmosphere all the time.
Shout out, by the way, to the St. Mary's girls basketball program. Epic program here in Stockton. Katelyne, how about you? Your Pacific memory that comes to mind?
Gosh, there has been many, but I think one of the ones that was a huge highlight for me was when I was an assistant coach back in 2018 when Kenna Ramey made NC2As in the 100 butterfly. That was a huge highlight for our women's program specifically, and just having that achievement that year. That was something that she had been working towards, and I unfortunately was sick the weekend and I couldn't go, but I remember FaceTiming her the morning that she got to swim her race at NC2As, and it was just, that was her last swim of her collegiate career, and it was very similar to my last race when it was my collegiate career. So it was a very similar moment for us to be able to get to share the tools of when I was an athlete to be a coach, and then have her achieve that dream was probably one of the biggest highlights for me as a coach and for one of my athletes as a female.
That's so cool. We'll move over to Cindy now.
Well, the biggest memory is as an administrator, because basketball, okay, we were starting. But the biggest thrill was in 1979, the very first year that we started the Wendy's Classic volleyball tournament, which ended up being the Bankers Classic, which ended up being one of the longest running tournaments in the country. We had been playing in the main gym, maybe 600, 700 people. And we decided to rent the Delta College Blanchard Gym, 3,000 people, because we had UCLA, Stanford, and USC coming to play. And this was Terry's vision again. And we promoted the heck out of it, drove up and down the valley, and we were nervous. We thought we were going to not get anybody there. It was standing room only. And it was exciting, and Pacific won. And that was the most exciting moment.
That's awesome. Kolze, you have many, 29, entering your 29th year.
I do. I mean, there's lots of wins and so forth. I think I'll go back to probably the first time I went to postseason was 1998. Cindy was here. Ironically, you mentioned the South Gym. It rained the 3 days before we were to fly to Tucson, Arizona. So our 3 practices, once we got the bid, was in the main gym. That's where we had to practice before we went to the NCAA tournament. And we kind of laughed about it because it was one of those years it rained all the time. And the team made the best of the situation. I remember Cindy was our SWA on the trip, because between she and I, we had to give like 14 finals on the road trip at the hotel. I'll never forget at the DoubleTree. We had, because our RPI was so high, we had the worst win and loss record of any team that went in. We were like 26-24. And we got to the regional championship. And so I think as a coach, the first time is always something you remember. But I think it's more of what the athletes have turned out to be is more important than anything you've done on the field.
Absolutely.
Very, very true. Glena, last but not least.
I guess my favorite overall memory is that in my senior year, we won our conference, and I can't remember the name of it. It was a slew of letters that no one cares about anymore. But we had gone from having, no place in the sun a couple years prior to, not just being competitive, but we were beating the teams, whoever were in our conference, all Northern California teams. And we were just really, really proud of that.
Oh, well, on cue, my dogs are going crazy. Sorry about that. Want to thank you all so much for the discussion today. This is a great exploration, and I think also very, very poignant. So you all have been fantastic, and thank you so much. Would like to let you all know that next week we will be back with volleyball and golf. We'll have both head coaches, one student athlete, and one alum from each program. So we hope to see you back here on Tiger Talk next Tuesday. Thank you again so much. Thanks everyone for coming. We hope you enjoyed, and go Tigers. We'll see you next week.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.